Hi, everyone, and welcome to Not Exactly As We Expected. This is your host, Christine, and I'm joined by our other host, my husband, Sam, who's waving. For those of you who are not listening and watching, Sam is just waving. On today's episode, we're going to talk about a topic that's actually not talked about very much in any community, but especially not in the blindness community, except in small circles. It's the idea of, is blindness a burden?
The other night, Christine and I were talking that, as we often do, about the different kinds of work we do in the blind community. And I said this sentence and it caused a little bit of a reaction. And we said, oh, this will be a great topic to talk about on the cast. And here it is. I said, I work in various circles within the blind community, and I haven't met a blind person that doesn't feel that they are a burden to their spouses, their family, their friends, their caregivers, you name it. And so, burden, it has, I think, in our society, a negative connotation. There's a taboo-ness about saying the word burden, especially in reference to another person and especially to somebody you love. Um, you know, Christine, you'll remember this. I think we mentioned this in a previous episode, but our oldest son is autistic, and I think the parents out here would relate to this. I think especially the parents of special needs kids would relate to this. Anyway, we did the obligatory trip to Disney, and it was not fun for our autistic son, and it was not fun for us as parents. Like, except for this one portion of the trip where he got to meet Winnie the Pooh, it was not his vibe at all. Like, he just wasn't a thing for autistic people. He was overstimulated. Nothing that we knew about how to parent him was working. It was a mess. And we're on the way flying home, and it's the kind of thing where you're like, I need a vacation from that vacation. That wasn't a vacation. And a couple weeks later, after that trip, I was speaking as a panel guest in a support group for parents of autistic kids. And I said the following. I figured, all right, here we go. These are my people. I'm going to say it. My son was a burden that trip. And in many ways, his autism has created a burden in my life. And people started crying. They're like, thank you for saying that out loud. It's something I've wanted to say, just didn't think I could. That can we ever get to a place where we admit that parenting a child with special needs is not only hard, it's burdensome. And that when you have a spouse, like in our case, that loses vision and becomes part of the disability community, that is burdensome or that person is a burden. So there we are. We're in it, we're in the pool, so to speak. So I think, and I'll say this boldly, I think as a blind person that I am a burden in some ways to my family. And it's something I feel. I continue to feel it. I feel it weekly. And that I feel that I'm a burden. Now, let me, for just to frame our conversation, let's kind of come up with a working definition of burden. So I did a little bit of background. I think these words are good. A burden is something we didn't sign up for. We didn't ask for this. We didn't intentionally plan it. It was something that happened, and that kind of fits. It's not exactly as we expected, right? So, burden fits in this theme of the podcast. Um, but it's something whose needs cause us a harder time of life. Burden is when something happens, unexpected, but the needs from that burden cause either the person themselves or others hard times. Sam, think that I am a burden to myself. My blindness is a burden. Sucks. It has made life harder. It just the facts. Yeah, and I know that's not a fun thing to say, and but it's my truth. It's real for me. Christine, I'm going to put you on the spot. You can wiggle around this, but you're an intelligent woman, and I know you know how to answer hard questions, and I know you know how to talk about hard things. Am I a burden to you? And by the way, I don't think there's many husbands in on the planet asking their wives this. or spouses. But it's been 4.5 years since I lost my vision. It's time. Am I a burden?
You're asking me on a good day. I'm just kidding. It's
Our
always a good.
ratings are going to go through the roof.
So I kind of struggle with the idea that, for me, if I were to define burden, I'm defining it based on my own perception of its negativity. If you asked
Mhm.
me if You're asking me if you are a burden, and no, you are not. Like, I don't perceive you in your entirety as a burden.
Me,
I
Sam.
think you, Sam, as a human. I don't
Okay.
perceive Liam as a burden. I see Liam's behaviors as challenging and struggle. I see those as struggles, but overall, um, I don't see you as a burden. I think there are definitely places in blindness that are tremendously challenging for both partners. And underneath all of this, like, sometimes I wonder, when I heard you the other night say that you felt that you were a burden, and I think we were talking about the challenges of not being able to share driving. And
Hmm.
now that has fallen upon me because we have a child that is an athlete and requires a pickup every night. I work full time. We do things at night. We work out, and even if you're home, you can't go and get him because you just don't have the ability to drive.
Hmm.
Um, do I find that situation a burden? Yes, in so much as I'm burdened with figuring it out. But we do that together.
Right.
Um, I don't like to have that to deal with. I'd rather have it easy and have all the stuff figured out so I don't have to deal with it. So that being a project to figure out is a burden, but you are not a burden.
Hmm.
Your blindness has precipitated this situation. For me, the idea that you're mentioning that you're the burden, I wonder if that's has more to do with the acceptance of blindness and your feeling and frustration and legitimate um, sadness of what you've lost, what we've both lost, if that is underneath what you're calling burden.
And it may be. It may be, and that may be a better question for the therapist. To my level of acceptance with, I don't know. I thought about that in a different way, and it may very well be. Acceptance to me is not a destination; it's a journey, it's a
Hmm.
process,
Yes. Yes.
whatever. But you know, me, Sam, and this could be from my own bias, my own privileges of who I am in the world, that I say this, but I am not one of the people who gets hung up on semantics. And so I say I'm a blind guy. I'm blind, and I do think, where I know other people find that offensive and say I'm living with vision loss or I'm living with blindness. But there's more to me than the fact that I can't see anymore.
Hmm.
But I don't have a problem just saying I'm blind. It is a distinguishing part of my identity. If I were to meet a stranger, or you know, whatever, I throw it out there pretty quickly. Yeah, I'm blind. I can't see. I lost my vision. So anyway, I say that to say this. You know, I interchange my blindness with who I am. So that's where I think the bridge is a short bridge to cross and say, hey, Sam, you're the burden, or is it your blindness is the burden? I see blindness and Sam as one of the same in some cases. Um, so that could be the piece there. Like, the blindness is the burden, the autism is the burden. It's not the individual. I didn't ask for this, I didn't cause it. Although I think there's times where I make it worse unintentionally until I have lived in the awareness of it. that I make the burden or I make the hardships worse. I could talk about that at another time too, but
Do you mean that because of your layering on top of that your frustration? Like, not only can I does it take me 100 times longer to do something that took me a minute
mhm,
before, kind of that's the place where it's making it harder.
yeah. Or making it harder, like I make so in this conversation, Christine, I think other than my wife and soulmate and all those things, um, I think it's important to say that you're a caretaker. You're in this role. You're the caretaker. If I'm the burden, okay. And I think there's times where, because of where I am in blindness, I can make the role of caretaker more difficult with stuff that's going on with me. For example, we sit down to a restaurant and let's just say we're at a diner and I don't know what I'm in the mood for. And I might not have my glasses or whatever
Mm.
it requires a lot for me to be able to see a menu. Like there's technology involved. It takes a long time and all that. Anyway, and so you often will read the menu to me. Well, diner menu is, for our listeners not in New Jersey, when you come to New Jersey, go to a diner. They're like books,
20 pages
every
long, yeah.
possible thing you want is there, right? So, I have to start thinking categories. So I have gotten to a place where I get frustrated by the fact it's weird, but I get frustrated that I am putting this on you, like, and I don't know what I want to eat, and I then come across grouchy and grumpy. I think I make your life harder in that moment because I don't want, I don't, I don't want to ask you to read everything to me. So it's like, you know what? Fine, I'll just pick this. I'll eat it, and that's that. Because it's hard. We don't browse anymore. I don't like peruse a menu. It's kind of like I have to think in reverse. Like, what am I really in the mood? So, but I think making you read that or like hear the specials, and that's just one example. That's how I can make your life harder in
Well,
that way.
you bring up a good point. What has shifted is our ability to be, independent,
Yep.
our ability to our relationship to independence, our relationship to dependence, and our relationship to each other. Because
Right.
we're connected, and all of these things and shift in ways that we don't often know. I'll bring up the idea of when we went to Disney.
Hmm.
One of the things that we didn't plan for, and we've been doing this blindness for 4 years. And so sometimes we think we're in a groove. However, we forget that we need to plan differently. We're in Disney, and then, you don't know the map, you don't know where things are. And the whole group is looking to me to guide us from one place to the next to the next. And so we'd show up at a particular ride that I think everybody can do. Um, and then people are like, "Oh, no, I don't think I wanna do that." After a couple of times, it's not that big a deal, but 4 or 5 hours of walking and me being the tour guide and me wishing that, I wasn't alone as your tour guide, nor being the tour guide can be super frustrating.
Yeah.
And that's when, like, the lack of planning, the lack of not having the conversation, making sure we didn't communicate can really fall apart.
Yep.
And I guess you could capture that as, boy, was that day a burden. Yeah, it was burdensome on me. Um, but we had a conversation that night and the next day decided we were going to approach it differently. And then you went back and you took the pains, because it is really a lot of work for you to look at the map. We agreed you would find 4 different events at Disney that you would look at. We got audio description so that you could enjoy it and it could talk to you as you walked around. You picked a restaurant and we partnered differently.
Yep.
So, blindness can definitely take us by surprise and create situations where we are both in it in a way that we hate, right? I think
Yep.
that's fair to say. We're like, "Oh my god." Disney should be the happiest place on earth. And here we are, totally miserable. But we get ourselves back together and we sit down and say, holy cow, how can we have done this differently? So I'm going to say that. But I think what you're really touching on, like that's a situational thing. You work really, really hard at being a good partner. You work really, really hard at like taking the feedback and saying, okay, so blindness, I love that you say this to both of us. Blindness is happening to us both. So then if that's true, how do I contribute so that her life is better or the children's life is better because it's now a new situation? And that inspires me to do the same.
Yeah.
I love something that Parker Palmer says about embracing the parts of us that are, um, the parts that we're proud of, the parts that we are shining for and we'd like to be known for, how dangerous it can be to only be willing to capture those things and share those things for our own self perceptions. So he says it like this. He says, he went through a period of time where he went through clinical depression. He said, I didn't want to appear weak. I was still dependent on being the good guy, the bright and shining guy, the knight in shining armor. I was getting my identity from that falsehood. Now I understand that it's a false assumption that you'll appear weak if you acknowledge who you are and what you're going through. It actually takes a lot of strength. But it took me a decade to realize that because I did not yet have that experience of darkness being integrated into my sense of self. It's important to fully integrate the dark experiences, the shadow side experiences into yourself so that you're able to stand in front of people and say, I am all of the above. I am my darkness and I am my light. I am all my gifts and I am my weakness. I am my accomplishments and I am my failures. In order to be patient with ourselves and understand that this is a journey, which is why I struggle with the idea of being a burden. Because as you said so beautifully before, Sam, yes, we are burdens and we are strength and we are inspirational and we are having rough times, but we're never just one thing. It's a paradox. And
Hmm.
the situation, it's not a situation of blindness because situation seems like a temper and we can't change this. But because we went from you not being blind to now always being blind, I think your default, as is mine, is to continue to build an awareness that this is our new circumstance and to, as often as we can, to refrain from wishing or looking back and saying, boy, it was so much easier when. I mean, I think that's our process. It's so much easier when we don't default back to when you could drive, when you could do whatever, because it just creates this frustration of where we are now. It's okay to acknowledge that and to visit that. However, being able to look at where we are and say, wow, we've come a long way. And in this really hard moment, say it sucks until it doesn't suck anymore and appreciate where we are right now as part of who we are continuing to become.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let me, if I could, circle back to two things. First, Parker Palmer. I guess it was he that you were quoting. I am so grateful, Parker, if you're listening, that you use the word acknowledge and integrate the darkness into your life, because if you use the word embrace, like earlier in that quote, I'd have vomited right here on the podcast. Like it is, embracing, I think, like open arms, hug, warmth. I can't do that with the parts of myself I don't like. I kind of have to like, oh, all right, let me just let me just start to do it little at a time. So I like acknowledge, I like integrate. That seems manageable. Ultimately, I would love to be able to embrace, be okay with, like, even dare I say, love the parts of myself that I wish never happened.
What about be patient?
Well, yeah, it's a process. That's part of the right. That's I would use that to describe the process of getting to that place. Great goals, but
And
take
then he
time,
says, and then wait
patience.
until there is readiness, readiness
Yeah,
in our spirit. And maybe that's where that the idea of being a burden is. I mean, I have felt like a burden as well. I think all of us have, all of our listeners. Haven't we all felt like, has anybody ever asked you if you needed a meal train? Right? In that moment, most people are faced with two things that is so spectacularly nice that people might bring food to my house, and the paradox of I don't want to be an imposition on someone. I don't want to cause somebody more work. And yet, what we know is when people give to us, it makes them feel good, when we're
yeah,
able to be of service to one another. But we don't want it at the same time because we don't want to create a problem from someone. So it's waiting until there's that acceptance, that patience with ourselves to say it's okay to receive and to not judge. I guess that's why I asked you in the beginning, like about acceptance. Is it about when we fully accept who we are and what's happening? I don't know this answer. When we fully accept where we are and what's happening, are we still feeling like a burden? Or is there an absence of, if you have acceptance, are you also feeling burdensome? I don't know.
well, to get inside of that, one way I think I could interpret when you use the word acceptance there, if you have acceptance, there's like a permanence quality to that word that I think a lot of people hear and understand. Like, oh, acceptance. It's like I've arrived. It's a destination. And I don't find that to be true. And so, for example, circling back, the other thing I wanted to circle back to was that night in Disney. After that horrible day we had in Disney, we
Mhm.
sat down together, and you told me how hard that day was for you. Okay.
It's terrible.
Now, prior to Disney, I was on the flight, like ready to go. I was ready to receive like those golden ears. Is that a thing? I don't know. Like from Walt Disney himself. Like, I got this. I'm blind. I got my dog. I got my stick. I got the audio description device. I'm gonna be like the blind tourist of the year award at the Magic Kingdom. And at the end of that day, it was just hell. But here's what I learned. It was a very humbling and necessary conversation. What I learned from that is an idea that I expressed earlier. Blindness is really selfish at times. I went in there with a game plan and my game plan was this. I'm not going to be a stick in the mud. I will say yes more than I'll say no, despite my reservations, despite my apprehensions, despite my fear of revisiting It's a Small World, which I hadn't been on and don't remember since like 1976. I'm going to do it, and I thought that was enough. And by me keeping that in place, it kind of created this like anesthetic effect where I wasn't paying attention to you, Christine. I
Mm.
was just, all right, I'm in my element. I'm winning this tourist award for the disabled community. I'm gonna do it. And I thought I was doing good. Like, sure, I'll go on. Sure, we'll eat this for lunch. But I wasn't being a partner. And I found out that night that I wasn't. And in that moment, I realized that because of the blindness, because of my lack of vision, I didn't notice rides, or we didn't have the audio description, and I prior to that didn't ask for help. I didn't go and say, "Is there an audio description?" or "Can I use my technology at night and plan ahead?" I so by me not doing those things, it was clear to me that night that I and my blindness I felt really, really like a burden. The guilt was thick, it was heavy, and I felt like a burden. Um, and I went, so that's kind of what I meant earlier in this conversation, where there are times in my journey with blindness that I think I add to the fact that I'm making it harder. And I talk with people all the time. I'll give this example that I think makes it harder, and it's harder not because of the fact that we can't see. It's harder because we're not acknowledging our caregivers or the people that love us. So I'm not gonna. So I volunteer in lots of different circles in the blind community. This is a common one, especially people that have like progressive vision loss, where they're losing vision over a period of time. And when does the day come? And so there's a lot of people that are really apprehensive about getting that little rear view mirror placard with the wheelchair on it for handicap parking. Okay, this is an easy process, doesn't require much, but you get to park closer in places of business. There's really good reasons for that. Okay. So there's people that I know in the blind community that are absolutely against it. And they say things like, I don't need it. I can walk there. I'm not there yet. That's for other people. A lot of the sentences start with I. And when you start sentences with I, it's very egocentric, it's very selfish, and it's not like, well, wait a minute. What could that placard mean for my caregiver? When you think about this logistically, um, if I had said no to the placard, what would that have meant for Christine, my wife? Well, if we were shopping at any, like, I don't know, Target's always crowded. The difference of walking 10 feet to get to the door or 100 and some feet. 100 and some feet takes longer. What if Christine's in a rush? What if she doesn't want to spend another 15 minutes, guiding a blind guy in the Target parking lot, watching for cars who aren't paying attention and backing out? Like, the probability that a car will back out from 100 feet away is much greater than at the handicap spot. So there's all these, plus there's more room to get out of the car with my stick or with my dog in a handicap parking spot. And they're designed with the paint and everything else. So there's lots of practical good reasons. However, I make life harder when I say no to that. If I say no to the handicap placard because of me, and I've looked into it and I thought, like, as I've talked with these people, like, why? I've asked them, why are you so against? Clearly, you got the medical paperwork. You can't drive. You can't see. You get one of these things. It's kind of like one of the only perks. Why don't you get it? And it comes up with, well, I don't want other people to think I'm handicapped. That's about you. That's about your pride, or it's about shame. So sometimes your pride, your selfishness, the fact that this is a selfish thing, the shame we feel because of those things prevents us from thinking about our caregivers. And we actually make that burden thing even greater because of because of those things. And I had realized that day at Disney that I was doing exactly that. That by me getting in my own head, like, I'm going to do these things, I'm going to do these things really well. Little did I know, like, I could have done more, and it would have lessened I could have been more present as a partner, enjoying in the planning of that day rather than just saying yes to everything.
I would say this about that. First, most of us who love others, our husbands, spouses, friends who are visually impaired, recognize that you have a whole different level of safety for yourself to navigate that we can't possibly understand. So I appreciate that you take advantage of making sure you're safe because in the ways that make sense for you, because I can't know that. I know you call that selfish. And I hear you in that we have to think about each other in relationship to each other in order to not be so self focused. That makes
Mhm.
sense to me. I don't regularly perceive you as being selfish for taking care of yourself, nor do I think most caregivers consider our spouses very selfish in that way until there's not the conversation or the acknowledgement that our needs are important.
Mhm.
So We don't always get that right or wrong, not that there is a right or wrong with that, but we recognize that there's such a level of necessity in the ways that you have to take care of yourself versus the way that I do, if that makes sense. You know, I
Yeah.
you know, I can see a car coming, you cannot, for example. I can identify if there is an obstacle in your way. You cannot always, and the idea that something could happen to you stresses me out. And but the other piece of this is I'm going to, go back to it is in what ways now I think you wonder, I wonder for myself in the face of this dramatic shift from sightedness to blindness is how does my life have meaning? How is it that I am in my heart and soul the person who I valued before I lost my sight? And I sometimes hear you when you say this burden thing, which I don't love that word. I really have a hard time with it. Um, I hear you saying, "Am I still valued? Do I value myself?" Is I don't think it's really about the blindness in that. It's because of it that precipitated this feeling. Like, do I look okay in the mirror? Do I like all of these things contribute to that worry, that wondering that you have, which I feel like is incredibly legitimate to wonder. And maybe it's that part of me just feels really sad that you and others who are blind also feel that as a result of this, you feel like a burden because your needs have shifted from even for yourself being super independent to being dependent in a way that you had never expected.
Right. Well, I'm going to disagree with you, Christine. I like the word burden. And but I it's not so much a disagreement, it's more about our relationship to the word because we have two very different roles. You're the sighted caregiver, spouse, and I'm the blind guy. The word burden
Spouse.
and spouse, yeah, and I guess I'm a caregiver in other ways. The word burden for me is a wonderful reflective tool because when I say to myself, how are you a burden to Christine, to your kids? How can you lessen that? It causes me to instantly get to be empathetic and begin to put myself in your shoes, see the world from your perspective, to say, is there things that I'm doing that I could do differently and better to lessen the burden, to at least consider their needs? I have a friend in the blind community, he's blind. I love this concept. It's called bundle. He calls it bundling. So if he needs things before his wife goes to work, for example, there's a time where he won't say, "Could you help me with the coffee? Could you help me get onto my this app or this computer? And can you help me, whatever, whatever." He doesn't do it at three times in an hour. He'll take a 5 minute block of that hour, bundle them together, and say, "Here's what I need before you get going. Could you help me?" And it makes it so it's he's being cognizant of her life, her lifestyle, and trying to do it in a way. And they've talked about this is easier if I do it. And it's called bundling. So it's a small little tactic. Still needs the help, but in a way that so when I ask myself the word, I like the word burden because when I say that, it doesn't make me feel good about the needs that I have. So there's that piece, and you're right. You touched upon it. There is self esteem in there. But it makes me think of how my blindness is affecting you when I say to myself, Sam, how are you being a burden today to this woman? Yeah, and what could you do? Like, is she sighing more often? Like, it helps me notice. It causes me to notice things in a way that I wouldn't if I said, "Yeah, and I'm not a burden. It's not my fault I got blindness." This is what couples do. This is somewhere in the marriage vows, better or worse. I think it falls in there, right? I could say all those things, but So I like the word burden. For me, it works, and I think it works to get me to notice how life is for you, and for me to at least ask, "Hey, how you doing today? How are you with this?" And I'm learning. This is very much a work in progress. I am, you know, um, you know, one of my favorite Bill Burr says he has this bit, and he's like, "My wife is like this beautiful piece of artwork covered by like that 6-inch museum glass. And I'm that building in the city that has scaffolding around it for 10 years. We're always working on it." I think it's like a great metaphor for my life. I'm working on it. I'll always have scaffolding around me in some way, shape, or form.
So,
But the word,
can I
yeah,
ask you this? If you have,
yeah,
as we close, what advice would you, or I don't like the word advice, but what would you share with those who are also feeling burdensome to their spouse or to their loved ones?
yeah,
Because certainly, you're using the word and that's fine for you. You've also offered some ideas and some strategies. What what would you say? And if you could sum this up in a couple of sentences, like I hear this in you of it's okay to acknowledge and to use that word and to feel that way because it just happens to be where you are and what it is. What would you say to people in your situation who are blind suddenly or over time that feel this way about being a burden to their spouses? Like, I hear you acknowledge it's fine to
yeah.
feel this way. And
So, and again, this is just what works for me. I guess to people that might not fully understand, it's not my job to sell them on the word burden, but when you think about it, there would be no caretaker burnout if there wasn't burden. You don't get burnt to burn out without burden. And that's a thing. It's just a thing. It's a thing for people that are taking care of people with significant needs or chronic kind of needs. It's in the autism community. Hell, I read an article recently that said it was written by a psychiatrist and a psychologist, therapy people. And they said, "What's the best gift to give to a mother on Valentine's Day?" Christine, what do you think they said? What do you think that the gift is? What's the best gift a husband? This is a heteronormative situation here, but I
time,
think it
I would say time, time away.
time away. There you go. Bing, bing, bing. You got it. Time away because they need a break. And there's this idea, I think, especially how we do with women and motherhood, that it's taboo. It's not okay to say, motherhood sucks sometimes. I don't like being a mother all the time. It's like not okay to say that. And it's also, I think, sometimes not okay to say, my husband who has this disability is a burden at times. So, to those people wrestling with this, I would say I have only found it. I use the word burden. You could put another word in there. One, I think it's a real thing. And to say it doesn't exist and deny it, it would cause me to be a better partner, to not be a good partner. It would force me to not be empathetic, to not consider your needs. So, one, own it. It just, but when you own it, it doesn't have to be something like separate the personal aspect of it. Like, yeah, the blindness is a part of who I am, but it's not all of me. I didn't ask for it, so it's there. And if it helps, use the word that blindness is the burden, not you personally. Okay, but it is your responsibility since it's happened to you and it's happened to the family that you need to take responsibility in figuring out things that you can do to take care of your caretakers and to make life a little easier for them. you know and I think it's helpful if you're not already get into you need blind friends, you need blind people that you can talk to. You need a community of people who get you and who get this so that you can have these conversations and you know um, talk through it. I will say, what you said too, I think is a gem of this kind. when we have needs, another way to look at it is that you're creating an opportunity for somebody to give. And that's a wonderful thing in some regards, you know. But I wouldn't have dared said that at the end of that day in Disney. Like I think I would have been like probably but still be in Disney. We still be not talking if I said, "Well, I look at all the opportunities I gave you to give today." That would have been awful. So you have to be in the right frame of mind for something like that. But yes, um, that those are the kinds of things I think I would say that it's. I think it's the part of just living with blindness or anything really. And this is not just blindness, but anything where you have needs put upon you and other people that changes your life and makes it harder at times. You need to talk about it.
Okay. And the richness and value of our lives changes by the sheer fact that we are connected and interconnected with each other. That is what we chose and we signed up for when we decided to have children, when we decided to get married,
Hmm.
and when we journey through life. It's accepting that darkness and that lightness and recognizing that we're journeying in this together. And that, to me, is what prevents it from being what you call a burden. That we are
Yeah.
together in this, we are sharing this, and we are connected in figuring it out, even if it's hard, and especially when it's hard. It only becomes a burden when it's only mine to deal with or
Hmm.
only yours to deal with. Is I would say to you, Sam, that blindness, in your definition, would be far more of a burden to you than it could ever be to a caregiver.
No. Well,
Okay.
that's a very nice thing. And I also think too, what the one last thing I think I'd say to anybody, if you don't understand, I think this is, I'll have an Oprah moment. I know this for sure. I know this for sure as I know anything. There is no growth without struggle. There just isn't. If you
That's
don't
right.
struggle, you're not growing.
Because you're not
You know,
getting
in
to the
order,
other side.
yeah, if you're not, and so as hard as that conversation was that night, happiest place on earth, Disney. Yeah. Uh, it's hard. It wasn't for me that night. Um, it provided the way for tremendous growth because we could talk about things in a very new way. And it helped get me out of that place where I was um, and begin to recognize that, I'm a partner and I have to show up. So no growth without struggle. Wrestle through it. Is what I'd say to the blind peeps dealing with this. Well, that's it for this episode of Not Exactly As We Expected. Please like us, drop us a line wherever you get your podcasts from. We'd love to hear from you. Uh,
And let
you
us know if is blindness a burden in your life or is it a
that would be
gift?
great.
Yep.
Yeah, let us know what you think of this episode. We'd love to, I don't know, maybe do a part two or invite you on. I don't know.
Thank you for listening to Not Exactly As We Expected. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by liking us on Spotify, Anchor, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.